Today, we're going to be talking about the trade offs between different paths that you can take when it comes to your mortgage. We're going to start with the journey to get a mortgage, whether or not it's better to have a good credit score or no credit score. And when I say no credit score, I mean pursuing the mortgage through manual underwriting. And for the main topic, we're going to be responding to this YouTube comment. This comment states that it's much better for you to be saving extra in a high yield savings account so you can pay off your mortgage early all at once, as opposed to paying a little bit extra toward the principal on your mortgage every month. The answer on which one is best may surprise you. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled financial coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. We're going to start with the story about two hypothetical characters, William and Patrick. Both William and Patrick are fresh out of school and they both want to pursue home ownership, but they are going to do it in different ways. William is going to pursue getting a mortgage with a good credit score, and Patrick is going to try to get a mortgage without any credit score. He's going to pursue manual underwriting. Let's first talk about William. William builds up a good credit score as he's getting ready to graduate from college. He does this by getting 3, maybe 4 credit cards and managing his expenses on those cards. William knows that paying off the balance of the cards every month is the best way to maintain a good credit score. Carrying a balance month to month not only means that he pays interest, but that his credit score can suffer. Now, the challenge that William runs into by managing the credit cards as he's pursuing a high credit score is that there's more friction between him and managing his monthly budget. By actively using all 4 cards for various items, he has to reconcile not only his checking account, but 4 additional credit card accounts as he's going through his monthly ledger and trying to track where his spending has actually gone. And while it's possible, this may introduce a friction that makes it so that once in a while there's a month that slips and doesn't get properly budgeted. You see, credit cards not only introduce a friction when it comes to the number of accounts that you have to reconcile, something that I've ran into myself when I played the credit card game here, just like our hypothetical William. But they also remove the natural pressure that you're going to overdraft your checking account if you're not paying attention to where your money's going. You see, when you have just a checking account, you can only spend what's in there. But with the credit card, you can really delay how long it takes for you to realize the expense there. Thus, by involving credit cards, there is a lower pressure to maintain monthly tracking and monthly budgeting. Okay, back to the story. William has his high credit score. He gets out of school and is able to apply for a mortgage right away. He has a credit score that's well over 700, and the mortgage lenders are more than happy to work with him. William is able to get a healthy and competitive rate on his mortgage right out of school and save on his insurance premiums. As the insurance companies look at his high credit score and say, "You're someone that we can trust, you're someone who's low risk." I don't understand why having credit worthiness makes you a lower risk for insurance companies, but that's what the actuaries say. Okay, now let's pivot our focus over to Patrick. Patrick is trying to avoid credit cards entirely. He's a Dave Ramsey follower. He is allergic to debt products of all sorts. He wants to stay away from them simply out of principle. And I respect that. I myself don't use credit cards for similar reasons. But here's a problem. Right out of school, there's not enough work history, rent history, utility bill history, etc. Not enough history in general to exercise manual underwriting. This is something that I ran into myself. But unlike my story, Patrick is going to stick to his guns and he's not going to play the credit card game at all. He is going to rent for a couple years while he gets his career started. And he's going to then pursue manual underwriting 2 years after he's graduated. So not having a credit score seriously delays Patrick getting into a house. The benefit for this moment is he's able to spend this time renting, saving up a larger down payment before he gets into a mortgage. You see, going right out of school and getting a house for William meant that he didn't have as much time to save up a down payment. He probably got his mortgage with the bare minimum 3.5% that you have to put forward. On the other hand, Patrick is going to try to save up to 10% before he gets his mortgage a couple years down the road. This puts Patrick in a lower risk situation. If the markets were to dip, he's much less likely to be upside down and will have a little bit more freedom to relocate and sell his home if situations dictate that. Now, even though the history's been built up for Patrick after a couple years, he's not able to get the same kind of rate that William got. He gets a mortgage all the same, but that slightly higher interest rate means that he's going to have a higher payment month over month. When you compare the situations, Patrick isn't going to be able to afford as much house as William did with his high credit score. And one more trade-off that Patrick experiences is slightly higher insurance premiums. However, Patrick says this is worth it because he's not interacting with credit cards. He's sticking to his principles there, and he maintains the natural pressure to stick to his budget, to track his expenses every single month. He wants to make sure that he's in a situation where he is naturally encouraged and pressured to be responsible with his monthly budgeting. Okay, we have two very different paths in the pursuit of home ownership through a mortgage. And these paths have very serious trade-offs between them. One is not necessarily better than the other. It depends on each individual, their desires, their principles, their values, their circumstances, and what's going to be best for them. I can't come onto this podcast and tell you you definitely have to go one route versus another in order to maximize your financial success. Both paths have their pros and their cons. Some of these trade-offs in one plan may be more quantifiable than the trade-offs experienced in the other, but they all exist, and they are trade-offs that you should probably consider if you're getting ready to get a mortgage through either of these paths. I sincerely want you to understand the choices that you make in the pursuit of your hope-filled financial future. And as part of your pursuit for that future, after getting a mortgage, we're going to want to get rid of it, right? Well, our main topic is going to focus on two different types of paths that you can take when trying to pay off your home early. Stick around if you don't want to miss the surprising data behind this decision. Today's main topic is inspired by this YouTube comment. We got this one on the main topic version of the Hope-Filled Financial Footstep number 7 episode, which focused on paying your mortgage off early. On that episode, I talked about the controversies around paying your mortgage off early. When it came to engaging with the decision to pay off your mortgage early, I said, let's try to get the house paid off before retirement. In that episode and the subsequent one covering my top 10 tips for mortgage success, I implied that the simplest way to get your home paid off early is to pay extra toward your principal every single month. This comment is responding to that notion by saying, well, you shouldn't pay off your mortgage sooner month by month. If you want to pay your mortgage sooner, it's better to put the money aside in a high yield savings account, or a bit riskier, put it on an index fund, and then when you have the money, pay it off. This way you will pay it even faster since your money is growing while you're saving. And when you finally have the same amount of money that you owe on your house, you can reassess what's better for you, to pay it off or keep the mortgage. Okay, let's dig into this comment a little bit. The theory behind it is if you have a high yield savings account that gets a larger interest rate, a larger growth rate than your mortgage's interest rate, it makes sense to invest there, let the money grow faster than the money's being charged from you through your mortgage, and then at some point, earlier than would otherwise be possible, you take a huge chunk, you pay the mortgage off all at once. And I want to highlight that the goal here is still the same. We're comparing two different paths with the same goal to pay the mortgage off early. And if interest rates on a mortgage were compounds like they are in a high yield savings account that's growing, well, we'd be comparing apples to apples here, but it's not quite that simple, because a mortgage works on an amortization schedule. If you can see the video version of the podcast, what I have in front of me are two amortization tables that I use to calculate how paying extra toward a mortgage's principal month over month can save you on time and interest. The way that these amortization schedules work is best illustrated by this graph above me. You can see in the graph that there's a red portion that becomes less and less and less of every column month over month. Meanwhile, the green portion on top gets larger and larger. The full of the graph, from bottom to top, represents 100% of your mortgage payment. And as we march along the x-axis, we're moving along our mortgage payoff journey. Each payment ends up paying less and less interest and more toward principal. This makes sense because the amount you owe over time becomes less and less, so your interest should become less and less. If you pay extra toward the principal on your mortgage, you can actually take the interest rate and jump further along the amortization schedule. Doing so makes the graph look something like this. In this example, we have a $200,000 mortgage, 30-year mortgage at 6% interest, and 2 years into that mortgage, a huge lump sum was chunked toward the principal. It made the interest drop from almost 70% of the mortgage payment all the way down to 50% for the following payment and accelerated the payoff journey. And for that reason, before we jump into the trade offs between using a high yield savings account or simply just paying extra toward the principal every month, you can see how paying extra toward the principal every month can reduce the amount of interest that you pay overall while simply leaving the mortgage alone, doing nothing extra to it, and saving in a high yield savings account leaves you paying more interest than you otherwise would with the alternative plan. And then there's the question of how much does it matter if I have a 15-year versus a 30-year? How much does it matter if I have a 3% versus a 6% interest rate? How much of a difference does it actually make to follow these two paths? And is there a clear winner or are there trade-offs between the two? So let's explore some of the data that I mined with some hypothetical examples. We're going to begin with considering only 15-year mortgages at a 3% interest rate. The top row here is going to be the base case where nothing extra is done. That way we have a baseline to compare our results. The second row is going to be paying $200 extra toward the principal in the mortgage every month. And then the bottom two rows are going to take that same $200 and instead of paying extra on the principal, we're going to be putting it in a high yield savings account. The first one gets 4%. The second one gets 5%. Now pay close attention, the interest rate on the mortgage is 3%, meanwhile that on the savings accounts here are 4 and 5% respectively. Let's look at the total interest paid for starters, and it's probably going to be easier to look at the graph in blue. In our base case, we paid nearly $48,600 in interest. We reduced this down to $40,700 if we pay $200 toward the principal month over month. Meanwhile, neither of the high-yield savings account options saved us more than $2,000 in interest. Does it save us in interest? Yes, but it waits to pay on the mortgage toward the very end, when interest is the smallest percentage of the payments that it's ever going to be. If our goal is to save on interest that we pay to the bank, it makes sense to put more toward the principal earlier on in the mortgage, be it in little chunks or in a lump sum. Now, the comment we received claimed that the goal here is to pay the mortgage off faster, that instead of prioritizing how much interest we pay to the bank and trying to reduce that, we're trying to get mortgage free as soon as possible. And I respect that. But if we look over here, we can see paying extra toward the principal gets us mortgage free in 12.8 years as opposed to 12.4 for the 5% high yield savings account. And if the high yield savings account only makes 4%, we're really only saving ourselves 20% of a year, 2-3 months. That's it. That is the difference in the payoff journey here. But the trade-offs go a little bit deeper than that. If we were to pay a little extra on the principal month over month, we're guaranteeing ourselves that we're saving interest in an effective way. We're taking advantage of a guaranteed return by paying on this mortgage. We know that the reduction in interest we experience later is fixed because it's on an amortization schedule. If we invest even in a high yield savings account, that high yield savings account interest rate can still fluctuate. And if we followed the comment's advice even further and went to a index fund, something way riskier, we might even lose money on the money that's invested there. And by paying extra toward the principal, we're locking that money away and saying this is dedicated to paying the mortgage off early. And I know that I've made progress. If I have to stop a little bit early here, I'm not delaying my progress as much as I would if I were delaying on the savings account plan. There's something about the high yield savings account plan, though, that depending on your situation is seen as either a pro or a con. That money is flexible. It's not dedicated or locked away to paying the home off early. So if you wanted to spend that money on something else, you certainly could. And it's there as a temptation and something that's liquid to access whenever you want to over that 12 plus year payoff period in this first example. We need to understand that some of us see this as a pro and some of us see it as a con. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's that they are different. Now let's consider the same example with a 30-year mortgage and see if the numbers come out any different. Shifting our $200,000 mortgage from 15 years to 30 years and leaving the same 3% interest rate has a payoff journey, paying extra on principal, of 21.8 years, and we only pay $72,644 in interest. The base example has us spending over $100,000 in interest and naturally takes 30 years to pay off. If we use the high yield savings accounts, we're going to be paying somewhere between $90,000 and $93,000 in interest, but we do pay the home off earlier than the principal method. In fact, the 5% high yield savings account now saves us more than a year. In the principal only approach, we get to pay off the mortgage in 21.8 years. The 5% high yield savings account is 20.4 years. But that again assumes that you're actually going to stick with the plan to dedicate that savings to the payoff of the mortgage, and you engage with it as soon as the balance in your savings account equals or exceeds the amount you owe on your mortgage. Okay, we've seen some trade offs that exist in a couple scenarios, but I want to see if we change the amount that we're putting toward principal or savings, if we up it to $500, does that widen or shrink our trade offs? Without getting too analytical, I think it shrinks the trade off measurement when it comes to the 15-year mortgage. For the principal only approach, we pay off the mortgage in 10.3 years, putting 500 extra toward principal. For the savings account, it's 10 to 10.2 years. Okay, we're fussing over 1 to 4 months difference here. And for total interest paid, putting extra toward the principal still wins out, and the difference between that and the savings account method is about 10 grand. You pay $32,700 in interest if you are putting extra toward principal month over month, and you pay just shy of $43,000 in interest total if you use either of the savings accounts. Shifting now to the 30-year mortgages, we can see that the high yield savings accounts can have us paying off the mortgage 6 to 14 months earlier than the extra on principal method. Paying extra on the principal has us paying off the 30-year mortgage in 15.6 years, and the savings accounts varied between 14.4 and 15 years. Putting 500 extra toward principal every month has us cutting our interest in half from the baseline. We're now paying 50 grand in interest over the lifetime of the mortgage. The high yield savings account options, though, still have us paying between $71,000 and $74,000 in interest. All right, the trade-offs between our two paths seem to be qualitatively about the same, and I want to emphasize that the path only makes sense to use the high yield savings account if your goal is absolutely going the fastest route possible, and that you have the discipline to leave that money alone. If your high yield savings account, however, doesn't have enough of an interest rate to beat that of your mortgage, there is some point of break even where it's a wash. Just to quickly illustrate this, let's consider a 30-year mortgage with a 6% interest rate, and the extra over and beyond is going to be the $500. Well, the baseline mortgage is going to be costing us $231,000 in interest, but paying that $500 extra per interest every month cuts that by well more than half. Now we're only paying $102,000 in interest. But if we look at the savings account route, we still save interest, but we're still paying more than $162,000 or $166,000 in interest. That is 60 to 70% more interest than we would be paying if we were going with putting that $500 extra toward principal month over month. And note here, because the interest rate on the mortgage is high enough, it takes longer to pay off the mortgage through this route. Because the interest rate is not high enough, it takes 6 to 18 months longer to pay off the mortgage by trying to keep the money liquid in a savings account and paying it all off in one lump sum. Now, that doesn't mean it's the wrong choice for you. If you have a situation where you need to have the flexibility with the money, or you're going to be significantly happier having the flexibility with the high yield savings account, maybe this still works for you. I want you to understand how much faster you can pay off a mortgage with one route and how much longer it might take if you were to change something up. Going back to the comment that inspired today's episode, you can indeed pay your mortgage off faster if you were to go with a high yield savings account approach if it makes more than the interest on your mortgage, given the illustrations that we looked at. However, there are still trade-offs that could make paying extra on the principal instead the wiser decision, the simpler decision, or the one that makes sense for you. I disagree with the commenter here that everyone should go through the high yield savings account when the interest makes sense, because the trade-offs here make it so that it's not dumb to still pursue paying extra on the principal month over month. Everybody's financial journey is going to be different. Everyone is going to be unique. The decisions you make are going to be different than your neighbors, but our goals for our hope-filled financial future are going to follow common paths. And the common path here today was getting the mortgage paid off early. I had fun putting this illustration together for today's episode, and I hope that you found it informative, educational, and inspiring. If there's something that you think I missed in this comparison here, or a third path that you'd like to introduce to the listeners, please tell us about it in the comments below. And until next week, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.